Welcome to OhSister, where I unpack my Mormon sister missionary journals 10 years later. Today I want to begin discussing the deep connection that Mormonism has with Native American people. And I want to begin by stating up front that I am certainly not a scholar in this field. I will certainly be getting things wrong, and I'm just going to apologize in advance for that. I've honestly been wanting to talk about this kind of since the beginning. I've been uncertain of where I should start. I felt kind of worried about trying to share and educate on this topic because it's in really big ways. This is not my story. I'm not an indigenous American, but I was a Mormon missionary in even North and South Dakota. So in that way, it is unfortunately part of my story. I don't necessarily blame my younger self for perpetuating harm against indigenous people in general, and the local nation people in my mission area in specific, but I do see that I have a responsibility for the harm that I did cause anyway, right? So, and I mean, like, just even if I hadn't been a missionary, I mean, I wouldn't do this podcast at all, but this was such a fundamental part to my beliefs when I was LDS, and it's just impossible, I think, to really talk about the LDS Mormon experience and not talk about this. So even when I make mistakes and it's maybe awkward, this is a really important part of my missionary experience. Even though I wasn't fully aware of that at the time that I was a missionary. So here we go. And I will be using the terms Native American or indigenous American or indigenous people as general terms, especially since in the context of the history that I'm discussing today, the church has used terms to group indigenous people into a monolith. So I just want to be as respectful as I know how to be while I am still discussing this topic. Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too painful of a disclaimer for you. Let's get into it. So growing up in primary, one of the fun songs that we would sing was Book of Mormon Stories. So let me go ahead and read the lyrics for verse 1, and this was written by Elizabeth Fetzer Bates. Quote, "Book of Mormon stories that my teacher tells to me are about the Lamanites in ancient history. Long ago their fathers came from far across the sea, given this land if they lived righteously." Unquote. So this song taught me, when I was a little tot, what I would grow up to believe and cherish so completely that I even became a missionary. I learned the story of the Book of Mormon. And I'm going to be straightforward and make it clear from the start that this is exactly that, a story, not a history. And this difference, story sold as history, this is the issue I'm diving into today. So from my current understanding, it seems like the very beginning of the LDS Church started due to racist attitudes meant to justify the genocide of indigenous people. And I know that's a big claim. So let me just read an excerpt from the LDS Discussions synopsis of the Mound Builder Myth, and then you can come to whatever conclusions sit right with you. And just so you know, LDS Discussions is, I believe, a special project of the Mormon Stories podcast by John DeLynn and like historians that he's worked with. If you want more information than that, please look into this more yourself. You please always vet my resources, right? Because I am a fallible person. Okay, so lots of direct quotes today, but it feels important to tell you from the words of the experts or the people who this is their lived experience, because I really want to not paraphrase things too much and accidentally get things wrong. So here is the discussion around the Mound Builders Myth. Okay. Quote, "The most important influence to the Book of Mormon is also largely shaped by the biblical beliefs of Joseph Smith's time, and that is the Mound Builders Myth. The Mound Builders Myth originated when European settlers came to the Americas and saw all sorts of mounds that had been built up. When the settlers arrived, they believed the Native Americans to be a wild, savage race, and therefore could not possibly imagine that they could have built these mounds and civilizations, and instead attributed the mounds to a lost, superior race of white people just like themselves. In the mounds were the buried remains of Native Americans, but since it was just bones inside, the white European settlers created a myth that these are the remains of these lost civilizations, and that they had been exterminated by the dark, savage Indians. If this sounds familiar, it's because the Mound Builders Myth largely mirrors the Book of Mormon's narrative. Some of the belief in the Mound Builders Myth was that there must have been an ancient white race that lived in the Americas that was destroyed by the Indians, which was a way for the settlers to claim that the lands were rightfully theirs. Furthermore, once the Native Americans began losing their lands and people to war, disease, and famine, this myth allowed the settlers to justify that the Native Americans could not possibly have been this evolved and advanced as a civilization, which further proved the Mound Builder myth in their worldview. This allowed the myth to grow, and these settlers then told stories of this ancient race that attempted to fight off these savage intruders using these fortified mounds until they were exterminated by them. Again, this is why the Book of Mormon's text was accepted by so many people in the 19th century. It was the belief that the Native Americans did originate from an ancient white race that was overtaken by the, quote, Red Indians, quote within the quote. The problem, of course, is that this was simply a myth created by these settlers to explain the Native Americans and to provide a justification for removing the Native Americans from their lands and to slaughter and decimate their populations. Okay. So, that's the Mound Builder myth from a historical lens. Some of the words I don't love that they chose to include the word savage so much, because that has so many bad kind of stereotyping, profiling with Native Americans. But I think in this context they were using it as showing that they're kind of from a historian perspective to show what the colonizers at the time were saying. So I think that's why they chose to use that word. But yeah, I guess that's the overall, a good summary of the Mound Builder myth. And I wanted to finish by reading the final quote from that section that has been the church did publicly come out to agree that what I'm about to say is true. Quote, "The Americas were populated by people coming from Asia as much as 25,000 years ago, and they were not in any way originated from a white race," unquote. Okay, so basically, I just want to make sure that we all know that the Mound Builder myth has been proven by DNA evidence to not be accurate, and is even acknowledged by the church, and they even changed the introduction to the Book of Mormon. And the Book of Mormon, the copy that I had on my mission had, the updated introduction that said they changed that, instead of saying that Lamanites are the primary ancestors of the Native American peoples, they changed it to say they're among the ancestors, because of the evidence from DNA showing that that was not the case. Okay, so I know this is a lot. If you could just hold this historical context in your mind while I read you this quote from my copy of Preach My Gospel, Chapter 5, the Book of Mormon, as a reminder of how important the Book of Mormon was as a missionary. Quote, "The Book of Mormon, combined with the Spirit, is your most powerful resource in conversion. It is the most correct of any book on the earth. Use it as your main source for teaching the restored gospel," unquote. That's from page 104. So, I certainly did not know about the Mound Builder myth, or really, any... I didn't know a lot of the stuff that I know now when I was a missionary. What I knew was that the Book of Mormon was the most correct book of any book on earth. What I knew when I was Sister Finlayson was that it was a history of the people in the Americas, so North and Central and even South America was what I believed, what I was taught. And that's certainly what I was telling people when I was a missionary. Now, I've been looking for resources to share on this topic because I've had a sort of gut feeling about the wrongness of how I culturally saw the Book of Mormon as history. And thankfully, I was able to find a fabulous resource to, be kind of my... I wanted to share someone's lived experience, the lived experience of a Native American person. So Sarah Newcomb, an ex-Mormon Tsimshian woman of the First Nation from Metlakatla, Alaska, who I think she runs this blog, but if not, she at least has a lot of really good historically good, well-cited, etc. articles in the blog LamaniteTruth.com. So today I'm going to read a large portion of her article titled Mormonism Stance with Colonization. And again, I wanted to just read, especially from her, I wanted to read her own words and her own interpretation rather than trying to cut it short for time and try to paraphrase things. I wanted to just read what she said. That felt like the best option. And hopefully this is interesting for you. Okay, so she starts with, Native American children were taken from their homes and placed in Mormon homes through a program called the Indian Placement Program, also known as the Lamanite Placement Program. She then describes the problematic aspects of this program, but for today, to stick to one topic, I'm going to skip ahead to where she discusses the impact of the Book of Mormon historical narrative on Native American children. Okay, so here's the quote. To add insult to injury, the children, when they were baptized, were told they themselves were Lamanites, living descendants of the people from the Book of Mormon. They were taught that the Book of Mormon was the literal history of their people. This Book of Mormon history superseded the traditional histories of the indigenous peoples, which had been passed on for many hundreds of years. The new history given to the children taught that their ancestors had turned evil. Their ancestors had turned away from God, and God had withdrawn his spirit from their ancestors, the Lamanites, because of how evil they were. God allowed Native Americans to be swept from the land due to unrighteousness, to make way for a more righteous people. God made the very skin on the Lamanites dark as a sign to other people of their unrighteousness, and forbade others to marry them, for the sign of the curse would be passed on to the children, dark skin. This was the gift the Mormons gave to indigenous children and communities. This was not a program of education. This was another form to, quote, within the quote, kill the Indian to save the child. End quote. Was this just another form of colonization? Definition of colonization, she gives a quote again. The action or process of settling among and establishing control over the indigenous people of an area. End of the quote, within the quote. And then she continues. What were the things the prophet himself taught during the years of the Indian student placement program was flourishing? Here are a few quotes from a First Presidency message printed in the Ensign from Prophet Spencer W. Kimball. And I'm going to read just 3 of the 4. I think it still gets the point across to not read all of them. Okay, the first one. This process of redeeming the Lamanite people has been far from easy, especially for the Lamanites themselves. For 1,000 years after the closing of the Book of Mormon record, these people wandered in spiritual darkness and were scattered upon the American continents and the isles of the sea. They lost their written language, their high culture, and worst of all, their knowledge of the living God and his work. Faith was replaced by fear, rich language by crippled dialects, and an understanding of God and his ways by idolatry, even human sacrifice. Second quote from Prophet Spencer W. Kimball. Lamanites, also a people of disobedience, now return to the fold, whose sufferings have been sore, and punishment severe, and humiliation complete, whose affliction these many centuries must certainly be fruit meet for repentance. And then third quote from Prophet Spencer W. Kimball. I have met some who are a little bit ashamed that they are Lamanites. How can it be? Some would rather define themselves as Nephites or Zoramites or Josephites or something else. Surely there must be a misunderstanding. Now we turn to Sarah's words. Quote, I find it interesting that Spencer W. Kimball was surprised that some were ashamed of being Lamanite. Was he intentionally gaslighting them, or was it accidental gaslighting? Did he not just say that they lost their knowledge of God? Did he not say their rich language was replaced by crippled dialects? He also called them a people of disobedience. Then, after saying he was surprised they were ashamed of being Lamanite, that the Lamanites rose in iniquity and were swept off the land, Native American genocide and colonization. Then added the land was given by God to the very people who had killed off the Lamanites in genocide and colonized America. Why he said he was surprised is anyone's guess. Mormons are still currently teaching that Lamanite skin was darkened as a sign of the curse, at least as of when she wrote this article, which was June 25th, 2018. And continuing, not all Native Americans or indigenous people have the same experience within Mormonism. Many are able to navigate the contradictory issues surrounding the label Lamanite and still continue to identify as Mormon. But not all indigenous people have peace with the narrative or label, and I hope they know they are not alone. Trying to accept and support believing family while reclaiming a life and identity that was stolen is a unique experience, and a very uncomfortable one. My goal is to at least discuss the fact that no one should ever be labeled Lamanite. The church has admitted that they do not know who the Lamanites actually are. Until we know, no one should be told the Book of Mormon is their history, and certainly no one should be told that their skin is dark as a sign of a curse upon their ancestors, as I was recently told by a missionary. No one should be told their people were killed off because of unrighteous ancestors, or that their land was given away by God to the very people who had killed them. As we try to navigate discussion around these issues, I hope we are able to express patience and understanding, while also validating those who have been damaged by ignorant actions, both indigenous and not." Unquote. I really appreciate Sarah for sharing her experience and her expertise. And I guess I just want to add my belief that rewriting and erasing the history of any people is horrific, and doubly so when the people are indigenous people who the invading historical writers have done their best to displace and even eradicate. And if you're LDS now, or you were in the past, I don't blame you for this, but I think it's something we should all, at the bare minimum, be aware of. And if you are a part of any indigenous community, I want to just acknowledge that I was a part of the system that actively spread misinformation about indigenous people. I want to acknowledge that my interactions with everyone I met on my mission were tainted with oblivious, passionate whitewashing. I want to acknowledge that I even interacted with indigenous people who were LDS, and I did my best to push them further into this religion. And I know blanket statement, general internet apologies are kind of meaningless at this point, but it feels wrong to not clearly state that regardless. That, I am sorry that is what I spent my time doing, and I wish I hadn't been actively harming so many people. But I was. It is what happened. And I feel like I want to say it anyway, because in my own life experience, I feel that the Mormon church has some things that it should apologize to a lot of people, and even to me, about. And I know it's the church's official stance to never make an apology, but just the same, it would feel really good if I got to hear an apology from the church, even just some sort of general, "we're sorry." So, yeah, that's where we're ending it for now. I've been having a great time working on this project, and it takes a lot of time every week to keep this up. If you have the desire and the means to support me financially, your donations really help a lot. Of course, I have the disclaimer that your donations will not bring eternal salvation for you or anyone else, but there are links in the description where you can make a one-time donation or sign up to join my monthly patrons to support this and my other creative work. For this episode, I'm also adding a link to donate to one of the leading social advocacy groups for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. Thank you. And let's get back to it. Monday, June 8th, 2015, Mission Day 241. Wow. I was just saying to Sister Snow, Well, we made it. We made it through the day, and we could write in our journals about it. I actually quite enjoyed our P-Day. We had Nora do our makeup today. Remember, she's been a model and trained in makeup. So, Sister Snow went first and came out looking pretty nice, if not a little tanner than normal. Then Nora asked me what shadow color to try, and I figured we might as well go all out and try the greens and blues. It was super suspenseful while she worked. Apparently I have almost perfect eyelashes, and my lips absorb color really fast. I'm not sure why that's cool, but she said it was awesome. Anyway, I finally got to look, and my eyes were definitely covered in green eyeshadow. I looked like I'd stepped out of the 80s. And then I drew a kind of befuddled emoji face. Sister Snow did a good job of holding herself together before we both cracked up in the Jeep. I'm very grateful she had the foresight to bring her makeup removal wipes, because right after that, we got her haircut at the beauty school. Sydney let us use her services to help clean Marvin's apartment today. Sister Snow volunteered us to help. At 8 o'clock, we still had his laundry to do. We asked his friends if they could help, and Sister Snow got very upset when they said we should finish the job we started. We ended up just hauling his 6+ bags full of clothes to our apartment to wash. Sister Snow calmed down a lot when she did a trending food challenge from the Pine Ridge Elders. Sydney and I really enjoyed watching that too, smiley face. No lessons today, but we talked with 4 new people, one of whom is a strong potential. Okay. I suppose I could have given you a heads up for this, but I was like, it gets to be more and more uncomfortable to read as we're going forward, so you're just gonna have to brace yourself. So yeah, very embarrassing to look back on this now. I understand the sort of weird situation that I was in with Sister Snow, where, you know, normally we wouldn't be hanging out with this older woman, and like, you know, it was kind of like an equivalent of like a pity friendship sort of, but it wasn't even that. It was like we had to find people to spend time with who would let us talk to them about religion and try to get them to be more excited about being Mormon if they were already LDS. So it was, I guess it feels very mean-spirited, looking back on this, for us to agree to go to let her do our makeup, and she used to be a model and she was excited about it, and then we're like, oh yeah, sure, you could do our makeup, and then we go, and then we were kind of like laughing about it after, right? That, looking back on that, it feels really mean-spirited, even if I can also understand that, like, in a healthy situation, we would have just said, no, I'm not interested in that, instead of like feeling like obligated to go along and then feel like it's silly, you know, like this was just a very doomed interaction, I guess. Yeah. And I think there's a picture of me somewhere that, you know, I didn't bother to look, and I do think I felt very silly, but yeah, just that whole thing, it feels a little icky now. Also, we were helping clean Marvin's apartment, and that feels icky already. Like, I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad that we were able to sort of do service and actually help someone, right, who we were trying so hard to push into to joining the church. But yeah, I could see why Sister Snow was so angry when it was 8 o'clock and we still had to do all this guy's laundry, and we were asking his friends if they could help and like if they could do some of it, and they're like, you should finish what you started, like feeling angry at that point is 100% a healthy emotional response. And it was weird to me to read this and see how much I'm just narrating things through the lens of Sister Snow's emotions, and I'm just like pretending as though I am just cool as a cucumber the whole while. And I probably thought that I was cool as a cucumber, and I probably thought that I wasn't upset. And I just kind of got caught up. I would just get caught up with whatever Sister Snow was feeling and sort of try to make her calm down. And that was my strategy for dealing with the ups and downs. And now I can look back on that and see that that's actually not a very healthy relationship. And I can see that I was certainly avoiding how I felt, and I was not taking responsibility for how I felt. If I was able to be really honest with myself, I'm sure I would have also been very upset and frustrated about the whole situation, and especially about someone's supposed friends being so misogynistic and unwilling to help, that they're like, you two girls, you finish the job you started, like you're supposed to clean, like, oh yeah, definitely infuriating situation, especially since we were supposed to be home soon, right? So that really stands out to me as, and then it goes into, we got all this tension built up, and I was so focused on how Sister Snow was feeling and just ignoring myself, and it just got us all in this weird place where Sister Snow found a way to relieve the group energy that was going on by like doing this kind of silly food challenge that like the Pine Ridge elders had told us about, and then like Sydney and I were there too, of course, and we all just kind of laughed together, and kind of that was like a way to let go all of the crazy energy that had just been building up. But my goodness, like that seems really alarming to me now, that we weren't able to just, as a little group of 3 people, just acknowledge like, wow, that was really weird, that was really sucky, those gentlemen were rude to us, they should not have said that, they should be better friends to Marvin, and they should not be so terrible to the women who are actually trying to help this guy, right? But we couldn't have that little group moment of just acknowledging what we were feeling and then letting it kind of, the only way out is through, right? We couldn't face what was really going on, so then we went and used this like weird like food like silly food thing, and to me that just feels like how that I'm not trying to say that Sister Snow had like a food eating disorder, right? I don't think she did. I just think that the mission environment and the mission rules and the culture of like don't be angry, etc., it resulted in us all needing some emotional release, and the release was through like this weird group experience of like a kind of disordered food thing. So yeah, just that's weird to me now looking back. I see how weird that was. I see how there were certainly other options for how to manage that situation. But of course, we did the best that we could, and it got us through it. But my goodness, I gotta just point out the weird. Okay. Lots of pointing out weird this week. Let's keep going. Tuesday, June 9th, 2015. Mission Day 242. During companionship study, we made a step-by-step outline of the plan of salvation to use for our dinner with Laura and our lesson with Shauna. I always go off on some crazy direction, so I determined to follow the outline. After a lovely spaghetti dinner at Laura's, I whipped out my planner with the sticky note slapped on today, and all during our message I strictly followed the outline. When it was my turn to ask, "What does it mean to you that God is literally your father?" I said it, then I waited for Sister Snow to fulfill her portion so that I could go again. As you can probably predict, that message was not very guided by the Spirit. And, as a weathered missionary, it didn't even bother me. Afterwards, Sister Snow talked about how she didn't feel directed by the Spirit at all, and I called myself to repentance, and our lesson with Shauna, where I observed, listened, and discerned, was so much better. I'm so grateful that I've been blessed with the opportunity to be training right now. It would be so easy to plateau if I wasn't with Sister Snow. Her constant desire to improve does so much for me. Okay, so a little shout out to my undiagnosed ADHD, where I was like, I always am going off on these wild directions that I wasn't planning. So I had noticed that, right? I noticed that I had a hard time keeping on track sometimes. We would plan out exactly the points we needed to talk about, and then I would forget them. So I was like, this time, I'm going to solve that problem by getting my little lesson plan right here, and then I'll remember it, and then we can do it exactly like we planned. And then, of course, I never could get it right. There was no winning. It's just always something was wrong. So what happened was either I didn't communicate to Sister Snow that I was going to do this, or she didn't remember exactly what we had planned or whatever. But basically, it didn't work as smoothly. I wrote the message wasn't very guided by the Spirit. And so after the lesson we talked about it, and I was like, yeah, I guess I need to repent, and I need to do better, even though I'm a bit at a loss for words, because that could have easily have gone really well, and we could have both been like, wow, that felt so guided by the Spirit. Our plan went super well. We were able to flow back and forth, but for whatever reason it didn't work, and I was like, oh, it's I need to repent, right? It just feels unfair, and the constant desire to improve, just feeling so much like I should not plateau, that I just need to be constantly improving my skill. It just had me on this hamster wheel. Okay. Wednesday, June 10th, 2015, Mission Day 243. I was having a hard time being patient with Sister Snow today. I think she felt the same about me too. I recognized it and didn't like it, but I couldn't get myself to actually talk about it and make it better. Communicating is still about at 0% in my skill set. It's so hard to start. Yet we love each other and are working at it, and we have some super fun moments. For instance, while driving from Spearfish to Hot Springs, we only spoke in question form. We also went to Custer County Candy Company. Sister Snow got 4 truffles. One was salted caramel as expected. I got 2, Raspberry Royale and Hazelnut Treasure. We had a super cool dinner message with the Stockmans. Last week, we ran out of time, so they each still had a Book of Mormon we'd left. So we started by having one of the kids go hide in the basement with all the lights off, and we looked until we found him. Then the other kid got a turn hiding, and we gave him a flashlight and had him turn it on when we had tried for a while. It was super fun. President Stockman made his wife jump when he hid in the darkness too. Smiley face. We then retired to the living room to read 3 Nephi 12:15 and 3 Nephi 18:24. President Stockman bore his epic testimony of the power in light and knowledge, and they're each going to try to pray about and hand one out this week. Okay, noticing, once again, kind of weird communication relationship stuff. Interesting that I actually wrote about it at this point in my journal. I was like, oh no, I was having a hard time being patient with Sister Snow today, and I noticed it and I didn't like it, but I couldn't get myself to actually talk about it. And like, man, this is so hard. So hard to communicate. Like, wow, that's a moment of honesty about what was going on. That's pretty rare. So like, it must have been pretty uncomfortable for me to actually write it down. I am curious if I was not projecting that she was also mad at me, right? Like I said, I was having a hard time being patient with Sister Snow, and I think she felt the same about me too. And this is I have since learned, this is a pretty bad habit I have of thinking that the way that I feel about someone is the way that they're feeling about me. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. And the only way to know is to ask and to say, but really just, it's usually when I'm thinking that, it's usually because I've got some upset with this person that I need to talk with them about, and I'm just trying to ignore it or whatever. So that's seems like a very strong possibility of what was actually going on. Just knowing myself now. The way that I kind of come back from this is weird to me, interesting. It's like, it's so, man, I was feeling impatient. Communicating is hard, yet we love each other and we're working at it and we have fun. Which on the surface could be a sort of healthy, like stepping back, looking at the big picture and being like, okay, yeah, today was hard, but like in general, we have a good time together and like we're actually good friends. But like, this is not a normal relationship. We were assigned to be together. We were not together of just our own free will of like, yeah, we're friends, we want to hang out. It was like, no, we had to be together constantly. And I was her trainer, so I had a position of authority. So that's like a thing. And there's just, I've noticed a theme of kind of a cop-out of like, well, we're having struggles, but we love each other, so it's okay. And kind of slapping that on as a band-aid rather than actually addressing what's going on, like actually making a habit of being honest, and working through things. And perhaps that was a necessary survival strategy, because perhaps if we were actually honest with each other, we would find out we did not enjoy being together 24/7. And how uncomfortable would it be to get to that point and still have to be together always, right? It's like, I don't know, maybe there was some wisdom there of just like, you know what? I'm not going to bring up what's going on and just kind of smile and be fake friends. And just be like, oh, it's okay, we love each other, we have fun. Because the alternative is very uncomfortable too, right? And it's a little bit ridiculous how the thing I like had to make a point that we had fun moments today, and the thing I could think of was that we tried speaking only in questions when we went on a drive, and maybe that was actually fun for me, but I don't know. In my list of things that are fun to do with a friend, that's not super high on the list of like actually having fun, right? So I think that was more of wishing and trying to paint things in a certain light, but probably not necessarily actually being super fun. On a different note, I also am feeling, I don't know if generous is the right word, but I'm feeling, I'm like, I want to read to you one of the scriptures that we read at our dinner lesson, talking when we were trying to get people to the branch president's family to share copies of the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to read the scriptures, and I will have you know that I flipped open immediately right to 3 Nephi 18:24, exactly to that page. So I've still got it. I'm still really fast at finding scriptures. Please be impressed if that impresses you. So let me go ahead and read. I mean, the whole verse is not quite relevant, so I'll just read the part that would have been relevant. Quote, "Therefore hold up your light, that it may shine unto the world. Behold, I am the light which ye shall hold up, that which ye have seen me do." Okay, yeah, so this is like context, I guess. This is like Jesus speaking to the people in the Americas. Hold up your light, let your light shine, right? That's basically what the other one says as well. And the moral of the story is we really like to have powerful little punchy things like let your light shine. We had a fun game with a light switch to kind of show like, yeah, look how much easier it is to find someone and to find the truth if there's a light than if they're just hiding in the darkness, which is like supposed to be a lesson on how we have the light and everyone else is walking around in the dark, and if we want to really help our friends and neighbors and, you know, everyone that we love, like, we got to shine them a light too so they can find the truth. And that means we want you to share the Book of Mormon with people, and we're going to inspire you with this good feelings message. So there you go. There's just a little example of the sorts of dinner messages that we would share with people. And also kind of funny, when I was opening my scriptures, I actually two little drawings of dinosaurs fell out, and it was drawings that I think this family's like grandkids, I think those kids did these drawings while we were at this lesson, or, you know, at least one of the times we were visiting them. And I've just kept it in my, you know, I just stuck them in my scriptures, and it's kind of funny that they fell out this time, right? Talking about the little lesson we gave them about letting your light shine. So let us all take in this lesson that we need to talk more about dinosaurs. Haha, I just. Okay. Thursday, June 11th, 2015, Mission Day 244. Sister Snow was so strong today. She had really bad pain, so bad she could barely walk, and her bites are super infected and painful. We went to our lesson with Bonnie, and then we did family history, and then I could see she was so wiped out. We took a break until about 4:30. Like, napped for 3 hours. I'm really not very tired right now. Our lesson with the Ikedas was kinda intense. The spirit wasn't quite there like normal. Trent's desire is less, or something. Sister Snow was so sad about that, she started to cry at the end of the lesson. She loves them so much. Oh, sister. Poor Sister Snow. What a short entry with so much suffering, needless suffering behind it. So yeah, Sister Snow was having a really rough day. We honestly, I don't think should have gone out at all. I think we should have just stayed home and let her rest, because it sucks to be out when you're dying of pain, right? So I'm glad at a certain point, after we had a lesson and we're doing family history, I'm glad I was like, okay, I'm making the call. We're going to go break. And like, at least I let her go take a nap for 3 hours. But like, that seems so ridiculous now. Like, just the fact that I was like the overseer of whether someone who was like sick and in pain, like whether or not they could rest, is just so not good. Not great. And then also, we met with the Iketas again, and the vibes were weird. The way that I described it was that the spirit wasn't there like normal, and I was trying to say, like, I guess Trent doesn't have the desire anymore, so like the spirit isn't in the house when we're talking to them. Probably I was sort of on the mark with that, but it was just that they were probably having a bad day, we were having a bad day, and he was just losing interest, and we could tell, and it felt sad. And maybe he kind of resented us coming over all the time, and maybe his wife really wanted him to be involved, and he was not that interested, and, you know, I mean, I don't really know, but it seems like there was some sort of noticeable group thing going on, and we were just like, oh, it's the spirit, but I think it was a little deeper than that. But the thing to really just point out is that Sister Snow is just having a rough day, a bad time, kind of a bad week, honestly, from the stuff that I've read already, and she was so sad about how it was going, and so committed to needing to be making a difference, and then he was just like not interested. Anyway, she started to cry at the end of the lesson, and I just feel for her. I feel for the pressure that she was under, and the external pressure from like her family wanting her to go on a mission, and from our mission president and all of the leaders, and me as her trainer, like, and then all of the internal pressure from herself of like wanting it to be worth it, and wanting to make a difference, and wanting to bring people to Christ and heal families, and whatever it is that we're taught is going to happen when we're on a mission. And it's like, it was just such a storm of frustration and disappointment, and I can just kind of see how, just like I had these, like, you know, I was just, you know, at the beginning of my mission journal, we saw so much of me just kind of like beating up on myself and feeling really down and feeling really inadequate. Now we're seeing that happen again with Sister Snow, and it's just so painful to look at this now and realize how she was being torn down, and like, I hope that that's not the intention of like going on a mission, but it kind of seems like it is. Like, you go out there, you've been told your life, it has all this meaning. You get out there, it's nothing like you expected. There are so many different aspects of why it's hard to feel good as a missionary and to even be successful as a missionary in the ways that you're taught you need to be successful. And then you have to sort of, like, you lose all of your old self, and this new self that you put so much stake in is also not doing anything, and it's just so soul crushing. And I was a part of it, you know. It's very yucky to read back on these. It's very yucky. For me, this is a yucky experience. Friday, June 12th, 2015, Mission Day 245. We accomplished weekly planning in one day today. We even got to do comp inventory. It may have taken 6 weeks, but we're getting into the swing of things. We had a sweet lesson with Sister Luck and Sister Reinhardt on Christ's example of prayer and how prayer changes us. The spirit was super strong, smiley face. The Rosenbergs drove us out to Sofrita Latino in Custer for dinner. They'd both just gotten back from work and didn't feel like cooking. It took like 2 hours, and we both ate way more than we needed to, but it was good. And now we're back in Spearfish, so we can go to ZTM tomorrow, zone training meeting. Smiley face. Yay! Trainings are almost the best part of being a missionary. So yeah, I guess just a reminder, we were supposed to do weekly planning on Thursdays, but it almost never happened, especially in this area when we were trying to juggle 2 different areas and get in all of our meetings with different people. We often didn't get all of our weekly planning done in one day. And then we even got to do comp inventory. Just a reminder, that's companionship inventory, where you tell each other, you're supposed to you're supposed to bring up any concerns you have, or like resentments or whatever, and then you're supposed to also end by saying stuff you appreciate about each other. And that was often what's the word I'm looking for? A very easily ignitable subject, eggshells. One wrong thing felt like it could kind of explode into a gigantic boom of things that felt better left unsaid and never addressed. So it was very comp inventory was often an uncomfortable experience because we were just, that's just what it was. But the funniest thing about this to me, or the most notable thing about this day to me, was how I wrote, trainings are almost the best part of being a missionary. And I totally remember feeling that way, and I loved trainings. I've talked about this several times, but just the fact that I wrote it down was everything about being a missionary is really hard, except for when we get to be in basically we're not being missionaries environment, and we're just sitting and learning. And it makes sense that I liked trainings so much because everything else was so unbearable. I don't think that every person who was a missionary had such a great time at trainings. I think that was a little bit unique to myself, but that was my experience. Saturday, June 13th, 2015. Mission Day 246. ZTM was so good. We started out the day driving to Rapid for the stake service project. We met in a huge warehouse and worked like a beehive to put summer school packs together for children on reservations. We ended early, so I drove Sister Snow to Taco Bell for a chicken chimichanga before we went to the STL apartment, Sister Training Leader apartment, for lunch and a sister's meeting on modesty. Good reminder that I need to fix my blue skirt. The zone leadership had a creative setup at the stake center. We met in the gym with some sort of chairs facing a table in front of the stage. Today, when we walked in, there was clutter everywhere. They had it set up with chairs and bed frames and cardboard boxes and non-missionary books strewn all over the court. It was part of Sister Harris's training on the importance of clean, orderly living quarters. And it made a point with everyone. When she gave us the opportunity in the middle to clear it all away, I felt a physical weight lift off of my soul. I think I'm really actually changing to be naturally a cleaner person. Hurrah! Then the combined training was a super well put together discussion on applying the principles of priorities and sacrifice to the concern of using time wisely. For more detail, I'd say review my notes at the end of the Blue Study Journal. It really helped me step back and think about what regrets I do not want to have. I don't want to hold back from sharing with or serving or loving anyone. I want to have been changed because I did the will of my Father. And I can do this as I set priorities and make plans to accomplish them. I was also called to repentance as they specifically committed us to take time every Thursday to stop and look and think about our true priorities. My patriarchal blessing reads, quote, I bless you that you will find time in your life on a regular basis to seek sacred thoughts that will help you to understand and evaluate the goals that you have in this life and to judge if you are able to accomplish those goals. I also really enjoyed and learned from our discussion on the importance of the Sabbath day. Before serving as a missionary, I wasn't really making Sunday a holy day, a time out for the week. The sign I was giving my Heavenly Father was that His church was important, but I was too busy or tired from working on everything else to really let myself stop and worship. I'd be napping or doing homework or watching movies. If I was resting from my labors, I wasn't then proactively doing His. I remember when I first realized that missionaries are busy working on Sunday, I was disappointed and a little appalled. I didn't understand what the Sabbath means. Now I see it as the things we do every day of the week are appropriate for the Sabbath. So I'm going to love Sundays after my mission. Sister Snow learned to have patience with herself, which was helpful. It sticks when the Spirit tells you. Smiley face. We were super excited to share all we learned with the Ikedas. The Hertzigs forgot to feed us dinner, which was too bad since we were going to have them teach us about the Book of Mormon. But when we called Pearl, she said they'd feed us. Smiley face. Then Trent wanted to do the lesson at the park. So we hurried and decided we'd share our crazy bold thoughts on setting priorities. You just gotta do it, Trent. At a later date. And just read scriptures or something. When we got there and started, we realized that Trent doesn't do everything because he's not only never read the Book of Mormon, he doesn't even know what it is. We've been treating him like a less active, but he's really more of an investigator. We were so glad Heavenly Father kept us from doing what we'd planned. The introduction and a walkthrough of the books was all we had time for. Sister Snow was being eaten alive the whole time. We also got cotton all over our skirts from sitting on the grass. And then we drove back to Spearfish for church tomorrow. We are so excited for church. It's been 2 weeks now since we've partaken of the sacrament. Okay. Let's start at the very beginning. Just a little shout out here where we're having a big zone training meeting, and I know I just talked about zone conference like 2 weeks ago, but zone conference is different from zone training meeting. Zone conference was when the mission president would come and like the assistants, and we would usually even combine zones. And I think zone conference was every other transfer versus zone training meeting was every transfer. And that would just be all the districts in the zone would get together, and then the sister training leaders and the zone leaders would give trainings. Well, sister training leaders, I say, it's really there's one sister training leader and then her companion, but anyway. So for some reason we started with a big service project. It was some stake service project, so I guess perhaps they planned to have our big zone training meeting at the same day as an organized stake service project so that we could help, which, I guess makes sense. I guess, isn't it interesting that we all worked together to put together summer school packs for children on reservations? Now, I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. I also don't really know that it's a good thing. I really couldn't speak to the needs of what do kids on reservations, like, what's going to be the, what do they actually need help with? I don't know. But this does, this reminds me of, there's a lot of, maybe not performative service is not the quite the right word, but perhaps detached would be the more accurate word that I'm looking for. Growing up LDS, every now and then there would be, a big hurricane or some big kind of national or even international event. And every now and then when these happened, like our church congregation, our ward, or our stake would have a service activity, and we would everyone's gonna donate things to send to these people, or we're going to help pack together like little hygiene packets for people who are, trying to recover from a hurricane. And I don't know how effective or ineffective those things are necessarily. I notice that there is a tendency to do things at a distance, rather than necessarily like helping your own community, like the people within your own community, rather than like people far away, and I think that is a notable problem with just sort of American service projects in general, is like wanting to donate or help someone in another country that would probably be labeled third world, like help them build an orphanage or help them build a hospital, or, go help dig a well or donate shoes, or, this is like a pretty common thing that's not just within the Mormonism, but kind of I see it a lot just in America and generally. And to my understanding, that is not the most helpful thing, really. To my understanding, if you really want to help people who are far away from you, the best thing you could do is just give them money, because they are going to know best what they need. They're going to know better than, the people in the community know what the community needs. And also, I know that there's a tendency for well-meaning, often in like American kind of Christian mindset people, but not necessarily, right? Just kind of well-meaning Americans in general, to get very moved about the plight of some poor people at a distance, but not really like help the people who are struggling in your own community. It's pretty common for people to be struggling in a ward or congregation and be trying to get help with having enough money for rent or having food, and their bishop can be very stingy about what they will give. Or, you know, when I was at BYU after my mission and I was married and I was starting to notice problems with this organization that was seemingly led by God and seemingly, if not perfect, then the closest thing to perfect that existed on earth. There was a homeless woman who knocked on my door and she was asking for help, and I felt like I wanted to help her, so I was like, well, I don't have any cash. You know, I was a broke college student, but I batch made meals, so I was like, can I give you, like, I know it's not very helpful, but like, would it help if I just gave you like a Tupperware full of soup? And she said, like, yeah, that would help. And then she also like needed some like ibuprofen, so I gave her some ibuprofen. And then I ended up, since I had been talking to her and I was willing to talk with her, she knocked on my door a few more times, and it turned out she was the LDS, but she was trying to get back home to Hawaii. And anyway, this whole thing, like, I was trying to help her get in touch with my bishop, the leader of my congregation and the Relief Society president, but her hands were tied by whatever the bishop said. And basically no one in my congregation could really give her help, even though she was LDS. And I was trying to reach out to different, I was like, okay, well, surely there are local, like, women's shelters or, like, people who do this kind of work, and it was so hard trying to get her help. And I just noticed that there's this willingness to make a big scene and do some sort of showy big service event to help when there's some sort of disaster, but when there's someone in my neighborhood or in my area who is struggling, the church is a lot more hesitant about helping that. And they, you know, so. And I guess I know that this isn't just the LDS Church. I know it's not just Mormons. But one of my big things about being Mormon was that the church was led by God, that the church was Christ's church restored on the earth, and the prophet was like the messenger of God, the spokesperson for God. So I was like, well, it's okay if other churches and other organizations have this problem, but for my church to have this problem, what? That doesn't make sense. So that's a little insight into service projects. And a bit of a tangent, but it felt relevant. So going back to my journal, I just have to point out that we had a special sisters meeting at the Zoom training meeting, and I don't know what the priesthood meeting would have been for the elders. I can guess that they would have possibly talked about don't masturbate and don't look at pornography. I don't know. But what our special topic was modesty. To the one side of the other coin, right? There's the constant training of, well, okay, speaking in binary terms, because that's what the church does. The church is always pressuring men about how bad it is to be lustful, to look at a woman and think sexual thoughts, to be interested or think about or fantasize or aroused by anyone who's not someone that you're married to. It is you can get your temple recommend taken away and be therefore deemed unworthy as a person if you are looking at pornography or masturbating. And this is very just focused on men in Mormonism. And then the flip side of that, well, so for men, there's often this really horrible neuroticism around because it's so drilled in that I've heard many men who grew up in this environment say that it like kind of destroyed a healthy sense of being able to just exist around women and not always be worried about this thing. And it made it a really big problem. And then the flip side of that is there's always this pressure on LDS Mormon women to be modest and to not be walking pornography, especially if you're young, which, let me just point out, is kind of creepy and red flag to especially teach the young primary and teenage girls that if they are not dressing modestly, that they are walking pornography for some men. Like, hello, can we not see how that is a red flag where, like, if you're a young girl and you are so-called dressing provocatively, which I also don't like, but even if you accept those terms of that language, it's teaching you that you, as a young girl, are inherently a sexualized object, and it's not like something that you get to grow into and own for yourself. It's like, oh no, I exist in my body is sinful and bad and scary, and it's going to make men sin, and I need to protect them from my feminine sexuality, and I need to cover myself up and try to look pretty but not sexy because I don't want to cause them to be sinning in their minds, right? That is rape culture. That's what rape culture is. And it's very telling that even, and perhaps especially, when you're a missionary, there is so much of an emphasis for sister missionaries to look nice but be modest. There is that undertone of, what does it mean if you're not modest? What does it say about your worth as a person? What does it say about your status in the church? What does it say about if something bad were to happen, who would take the blame? It would be you, the woman. Yes. So I don't like that. Then, if we jump to the training about having a clean, orderly living quarters. Reading this was very strange. It felt really Twilight Zone to me. Like, I think we're getting to the point in my journal where I've kind of lost a sense of what's real and what's weird. Like, I think in the beginning of my journal, I was kind of still writing to the perspective of like what would be normal for someone who wasn't a missionary to read and like not feel kind of weirded out sometimes. But at this point, week 37, I have lost my sense of what's gonna make just the average faithful LDS person feel like, okay, this feels like kind of culty and strange, I think. The way that I'm writing about different things. Like this, reading this, I was like, the language that I'm using and the way that I'm talking about the experience, it reminds me of the show Severance, which is, to hopefully not spoil it too much, it's about the brainwashing of people who are trapped in an organization to get used to go, the point of the organization that these people are stuck working in is to get them used to having to, like, maybe at first you fight it and you don't like it, but they break you down and you learn to just accept and go along with and love this system of exploitation that you're just trapped in. And the way that I'm talking about this training felt really strangely familiar with the language that they used in that show. For example, I wrote, I was writing, so they made a big mess. And then I wrote, she gave us the opportunity to clean it up. And using the word opportunity was totally not sarcastic. It was genuine. I really did believe that it was an opportunity, and I did, like I said, I felt a physical weight lift off of my soul. I think I'm really actually changing to be naturally a cleaner person. Like, the intense pressure and the intense messaging and environment we were in, there was no sarcasm in like, wow, this is ridiculous. They make a mess. They tell us it's important to live somewhere clean, and now as like a weird like hazing, punishing thing, they make us all clean it up. No, I was like, oh, I can tell how when I'm in a disorganized, messy place, like it weighs on my soul, and it's like inviting the devil, and I need to clean it so I can be closer to God. Like, that was really what I was feeling. Yes. So that was really intense to me. And then along with that training, they are talking about priorities and sacrifice and using our time wisely, which is it was a theme of the big conference that we had just had. So of course they kept going. And I was very grateful to my missionary self that I didn't write my whole notes in here. I was just like, you can reference this journal to read them. Like, oh, thank God. I don't want to have to read through another transcript of another really toxic training again. But what I did write was my takeaway, which was very same, like, strange Twilight Zone experience. You know, I was like, what are the regrets? My takeaway from using time wisely and making priorities and sacrificing was like the threat of regret and the unrealistic expectation of what was possible for me to do based on the fear of regret. So it seems like they talked a lot about how important it is to just do everything perfectly and how terrible it is to regret something, especially on your mission, because you only get to do your mission once. You can never go back and do it again. So I was like, well, let's see. Yeah, I don't want to have big regrets. And here are things that I think it's possible for me to always do. I thought it was possible for me to always share with anyone. I thought it was possible for me to always serve anyone. And I thought it was possible for me to always love anyone. And I thought that as I did that would change me, by being obedient to that would change me into being more Christ-like and more God-like. And I was afraid of the regret of a single time not doing any of those things. And now I can see that is not only not possible, but not a good idea and not a safe idea, not a wise idea. I'm actually being an irresponsible adult who has to take care of myself if I always share everything that I have and serve and love anyone, right? Like, that's not a healthy thing to do. And then, of course, they tell us that we need to specifically, regularly think about what are our real priorities with our time, which is such a trap, because when you're a missionary, you don't have time to stop and think about what you're going to do with your time. And even if you do, someone has told you what your priorities are. So it's just like, if you do somehow find time in the schedule that there's no time to do this for, it's just going to be a session of self-flagellation for not being good enough according to the standards that have been given you and thinking that it's your own. But I once again quote this part of my patriarchal blessing that came up a few weeks ago, which really surprised me to I guess I had been thinking about this a lot still, that I was like, I'm gonna write this down again because it was so formative. Anyway. And then the last thing from this that I'll point out, even though there were many things, was the last little Severance Twilight Zone moment of the training, my takeaways from the training. I'll just read this part again. I said, I remember when I first realized that missionaries are busy working on Sunday, I was disappointed and a little appalled. I didn't understand what the Sabbath means. Okay, so the setup there was, I was like, oh yeah, when I was a new missionary and I learned what the missionary schedule was like on Sunday, I was honest here, and I said I was disappointed and a little appalled. And like more than a little, I was appalled. I was like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. Like, this feels impossible. I have to rest sometimes. But the way that I wrote that down, because now I felt like I had seen the light, and now it was like, oh, yes, I understand the wisdom behind it. So here's the way that I reframe and I gaslight myself, and this is what I was told. So like we were all kind of being gaslit to think this, but here I am like writing it down and trying to like reinforce it. As I said, I didn't understand what the Sabbath means. So this is really tricky, this sentence, because if you can change the definition of a word and to win the argument, the result will be that you will win the argument and change minds. And this is, I think, a pretty common tactic in kind of like bad faith arguments, or even in systems of like exploitation, or at least like misinformation or propaganda, or like emotional control, that kind of thing. So in reality, the reality was that missionaries, we were told to keep the Sabbath day holy, and all growing up I had a specific definition of what that meant, and it usually was a list of things we weren't supposed to do, along with we were supposed to go to church, but there were a lot of like regular activities that we were not supposed to do. And to me, and to the experience of most people I grew up with, Sunday was a day of rest. And so finding out that missionaries were so busy, I was accurate in my response of, this is disappointing for when I go on a mission, because this is not what I expected. And I'm kind of upset at the church for like making missionaries do this. But then the church missionary department, whatever, they just change it and they say, no, your idea of your boundaries around what you're supposed to be doing, well, God really owns your boundaries. God owns you and owns what you should and should not be doing. And what if we tell you that when God says to keep the Sabbath day holy and that it should be sort of a day of rest, that doesn't mean that if you're tired, you should take a nap. And if you've been working really hard all week, you should have a day with your family or whatever. No. It means actually you need to be actively involved in God's work. That the way that you worship God is by doing God's labor. So yeah, you rest from your labors, but you do that by doing God's labor. So there was this tricky redefinition that got around my upset and taught me to accept the situation and be okay with the demands for continued work to the point of exhaustion. Yes, I hope I explained that well enough. Let's go to Sunday. Sunday, June 14th, 2015, Mission Day 247. Happy Flag Day! There are blessings associated with keeping the Sabbath day holy. We felt an abundance of that today. Smiley face. We were at church early for branch missionary coordination and branch council, which coincidentally, in quotation marks, was short today, so they'd have time to do a training on the important principles of keeping the Sabbath day holy. So, while we were waiting, a woman came in and sat in the foyer. Sydney recognized her as Janice, an investigator in November who had suddenly moved away. Now she's back and living in the women's shelter, and she wanted to meet. Sister Dalton spoke in sacrament meeting about how her faith has grounded her during her many trials, and her life situations really draw her to Janice, so we all met this evening, and it was great. On the way to Janice's, we had a hard time finding the women's shelter, so we said a prayer, then turned a corner, and there it was. President Stockman had called before church to ask me to speak at the sacrament meeting at the VA right after church, so I decided to just do my talk on prayer in the Blue Journal. When we got there, we ended up only having one attendee, Officer Candidate Buckland, and he spoke to us about prayer. In his life, prayer was really the key to him becoming active and converted. Answers to prayer truly strengthen faith. And then I kind of wrote this down twice. I think I was a little confused, but sorry for I don't know. I'm just going to read what I wrote. We got to go out by the VA hospital to do sacrament meeting for Officer Candidate School, OCS. Brother Buckland was the only one there, but it was awesome. He gave a sweet talk on prayer, about how he said a prayer for a safe trip home during college, and then survived an accident miraculously. He then served a mission and married in the temple, and now is going to become an officer. He just carries his assault rifle around like it's no big deal. Smiley face. Our lesson with Marvin was great. We set a weekly goals sheet. He set his own goals. Learn more and go to church. We brought Sister Dalton to meet with Janice at the women's shelter. I forgot to pay attention when she gave us directions, and they tried to disguise those buildings, so we drove around for a few minutes searching. Finally, I suggested we say a prayer, and then we did, turned a corner, and boom, there it was. We found her. We had a good HTBT, How to Begin Teaching, /faith lesson, and we're super excited. She'll be baptized, she said, when she knows it's true. On Sister Call, we told Sister Harris all about our application from ZTM on keeping the Sabbath day holy for ourselves. We saw a lot of blessings come from that. Wow. So many things I could say. I'll just point out that somehow I ended up writing about like two of the things from the day twice, so that's kind of confusing. And there were many things that stood out to me, and I don't want to talk about them all because this is pretty long, so I'll just talk about a few. I'll just point out that, we've got this miraculous new find of an investigator, which was very exciting, and that's what it felt like. That was a result of us keeping the Sabbath day holy. And certainly not just a coincidence at all. But there's this woman, Janice, who had suddenly moved away, and now she was back in a women's shelter. So obviously she was in a really bad situation, and we certainly had most of our luck with converting people if they were in bad situations like this. So I hope that we didn't keep her from actually getting the help and getting back on her feet and being safe and all that. I don't quite remember this. Maybe I will remember it more as we read on, but yeah, that's a pretty common reality of at least my mission. And also, so Sister Dalton, you probably don't remember, she is one of a local branch members who is, she is a Native American woman, and she was a faithful Mormon. And I didn't say it clearly, but I wrote her life situations really draw her to Janice. So we were trying to connect Sister Dalton with Janice, and I'm assuming that Janice was also a Native American woman. And I want to talk about, more specifically about just the situation that indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people are in. I brought that up in the kind of, if you want to donate to help, but basically Native American women are 10 times, at 10 times the risk of going missing or being murdered than the national average. So there's just a lot of exploitation going on here in so many levels, and Janice really needed a lot of help and support. I think at this point she was probably in a really dangerous situation, and the fact that we were the ones that she was interacting with, and we were trying to get her into this group that has a history of many things, but I mean just the history of erasing and rewriting indigenous people's history is not great. And I don't think she knew that. And it was pretty sneaky of us to try to just convince her that we were a good group by saying, oh, hey, you should be friends with Sister Dalton, right? That feels icky looking back on. And at the end also I wrote, we had a good lesson with Janice, and she said that she'll be baptized when she knows that it's true. And I think of the way that I read this is I was almost like, well, how do I say this? I was a little bit like annoyed at her insistence at knowing that this was true before she was baptized, you know? Like, I mean, I was confident she would come to find it was true and then get baptized. But I was kind of like, I mean, just get baptized and then you'll know it's true. Like, if you want to know it's true before you get baptized, like, that's the wrong order. Like, you gotta act in faith and then you'll know it's true. Which just feels, that is a red flag, actually. And then just jumping to the story with Officer Candidate Brother Buckland, this kind of just a bit of a blind side here. I was not expecting this at all when I was reading this. I totally forgot about this. I think I just want to, I was not sure if I should even include this, but I decided ultimately that it is what I wrote down and it is what I experienced, so I don't feel like I need to edit it. But just, you know, I wrote, he just carries his assault rifle around like it's no big deal, smiley face. And he was, you know, this was an LDS man. And this is, you know, atypical for LDS people in my experience. I'm normally not going to sacrament meetings, and there are normally not, you know, LDS guys bringing their assault rifles into the meeting. I think this is a little bit context specific. We were at the Veterans Hospital doing a special meeting for veteran people. So maybe he like had to have his gun there with him. I don't know. I just, that is what happened. And I do want to acknowledge that there was just, that horrible incident an incident of terrorism against an LDS congregation in Michigan. And, that's not good. That's not what I want. It's been obviously harder for the people who are directly impacted, but it's been hard for me to know how to deal with, and devastating for me in the way that acts of violence against a group are always bad, but it feels different when it's, your community, right? So yeah, just not good. We don't like that. And also I'm not saying that this guy would have done anything like that either, but it's just strange how casually having an assault rifle is just happening here. And that's my 37th week as a Mormon sister missionary. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you want to continue following my story. Ratings and reviews are very helpful, and please share this with anyone you think would be interested. I hope you have a great week, and if you want my advice, just remember that you can love others best when you love yourself first. Bye!